So, um, I first want to start off by saying thank you to the DHS Green Earth for reaching out to the Dublin High Democrats to speak about climate politics in their climate webinar. I'm super excited to be here. Um, and yeah, I really hope that you guys learned something today. And let's get started. First of all, I want to introduce a little bit about myself. My name is Maya Taitanen. I am the co-president of the Dublin High School chapter of the High School Democrats of America. I'm also co-president of the Dublin High Gender Sexuality Alliance, and I generally try to be as involved as possible in social justice in my community and as much as possible in my country. So yeah, there's a picture of me at the 2019 climate strike at Dublin High. So yeah. All right, so first I would like to talk about why do we call it climate politics? Like, why do politics have to be so involved in the way we address climate change? And the thing is, as most of us know, our American society is run by mega corporations. There are 100 energy companies who are responsible for 71% of all industrial greenhouse gas emissions. These companies profit off of continuing long-standing traditional industry practices that produce most of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. And because of that, they form the backbone of the threat that is global climate change. So our government's function is to protect its citizens from foreign and domestic threats, and that includes climate change. Congress and the executive branch have the power to impose limits on the industrial practices of corporations located in the US. So as the center of the global economy and of international culture, the US, more than any other country, has the responsibility of regulating industrial practices and leading the fight against global climate change. However, there is a huge partisan divide on this. According to a study by the Pew Research Center in 2018, as you can see on the slides, in 2018, 67% of Democrats and 21% of Republicans believe that climate change should be a top priority for both the president and Congress. And that is a truly alarming gap. But the thing is, when global warming, as it was called then, first became a national issue in the 1970s, both Democrats and Republicans took it seriously and worked to enact preventative measures in legislation. However, in the 80s, ExxonMobil and other fossil fuel corporations banded together on a misinformation campaign about climate change because they wanted to prevent countries from signing the I forgot to write down the name of the accords. It was the 1997 thing from the Kahoot. It started with an S. Does anyone remember what it was?
You mean Kyoto? You mean
Sorry?
Wait, 1997? That one?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah, that was the Kyoto, right?
Yes. The Kyoto Accords.
Mm-hmm.
To say.
I
should have written this down.
It's fine.
But yeah, they wanted to raise doubts about the validity of climate research, and they claimed that climate change was just caused by natural global processes, not by human intervention. And ever since ExxonMobil's misinformation campaign, the GOP has stopped taking an active role in the prevention of climate change, and thus climate change has been reframed as part of a leftist agenda. However, it is extremely important for us to recognize that climate change is an issue that affects every human being, regardless of political affiliation. So that's why we are talking about climate politics today. And I hope you will bear with me as we talk about three super important parts of our climate political landscape. The first of these issues is the EPA, and then we're going to talk about the Green New Deal and the Paris Climate Agreement. So first of all, with the EPA, or the Environmental Protection Agency, was formed under the Nixon administration, interestingly, as a response to public fears about the purity of water sources, the use of lead in gasoline, and air pollution. And the agency has the power to perform research and investigations on the impact of pollutants in the environment. They also have the power to establish environmental baselines that define the normal state of the environment. And they have the power to form and enforce standards for pollution done in tandem with each state government. And the EPA is specifically a federal agency, meaning that the decisions made within the EPA impact the entire nation. And this makes the EPA significantly more powerful than state agencies for environmental protection. And so what's going on right now with the EPA? So the Trump administration has appointed EPA chiefs whose interests are frequently in conflict with the protection of the environment. The first appointed chief, Scott Pruitt, he became the target of public outcry in 2018 when a congressional investigation found him guilty of abusing funds. Among other personal purchases, Pruitt had bought a $43,000 phone booth. And one of the costs listed in his $3.4 million security detail was for when he directed agents to drive him to multiple locations in search of a particular lotion on offer at Ritz-Carlton hotels. And all that is just simply gross abuse of EPA funds. And then, so his successor was Andrew Wheeler. And what is alarming about Andrew Wheeler is that he previously worked as a lobbyist for the coal, chemical, and uranium production industries. And the interests of the coal, chemical, and uranium production industries are clearly at fundamental odds with the role of the Environmental Protection Agency. However, Wheeler did previously work in the EPA under George H.W. Bush and later on the Senate committee overseeing the EPA. So perhaps we cannot be too surprised that he was put back into his position as chief of the EPA, although it is extremely alarming. And that brings us to some of the things that have gone on within the EPA. And specifically, as of July 15th, 2020, 68 environmental protection policies have been repealed with
Is it frozen for you guys?
Yeah, it's frozen for me.
Stop talking.
Sorry?
Oh, you were at 68 protection policies have
Oh,
been
I'm sorry.
That's
Okay, so as of July 15th, 2020, 68 environmental protection policies have been repealed with 32 more repeals currently underway. Some of the repealed policies include Obama administration federal limits on greenhouse gas emissions, various federal and state policies protecting national parks against air pollution, and regulations concerning drilling and fracking in wildlife and Native American reservations. And some of the repeals that are currently ongoing include no longer requiring companies to monitor methane leaks at oil and gas installations, exemptions for power plants to dump toxic waste into public waterways, and limiting the power of the EPA to conduct research into the effects of pollutants. Okay, it is important to note that the latter three are still under review, and even if they are repealed, the repeals can be overturned, which brings us to a little bit of hope that we do have for this. So, how we can help. While the EPA has been running as like the federal side of protecting the environment, various other private activist groups have risen up. For example, the Environmental Defense Fund, or the EDF, has existed for longer than the EPA and also conducts research into and devises solutions for pollution and especially climate change. And the National Resources Defense Council, or the NRDC, is a powerful lobbying group specializing in environmental protections. And they have actually successfully sued the EPA to reinstate regulations on mercury pollution and for the replacement of Flint, Michigan's water supply. So it is extremely important that those of us who are environmentally concerned and who want to combat climate change, that we support these activist groups like the EDF and the NRDC. The EDF actually claims to match each $1 donation to partner organizations with an additional $2. Yeah, and of course, one of the most important things we can always do is to maintain awareness. Final decisions made by the EPA under Trump may be undone via the Congressional Review Act. However, this requires a Senate majority. And that obviously requires us to vote, to do our basic civil duty as citizens of the United States, to vote, or if we're too young to tell our parents to vote, tell our relatives to vote, tell our friends to vote. We need to vote Democrats and climate-minded politicians into office, and we need to vote those who would put people like Pruitt or Wheeler into office out. And yeah, that concludes what I have on the EPA. Does anyone have any questions?
Oh, I have one question about how often they nominate or they elect people into the EPA. So do the directors change every 2 years, or was that just a coincidence?
I'm not sure exactly what the term limits are for federal agency directors and chiefs and stuff like that. But I do know that Pruitt did have to be replaced because of the congressional investigation that found him guilty of abuse of funds. And that's how Andrew Wheeler had to come back in to the EPA. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah.
Mhm. Does anyone else have any other questions about the EPA?
So, like, about Wheeler, how is he, like, elected to be the leader?
He was not elected. He was chosen by Trump, which is why the presidential election is so important, because not only are you choosing your president, but you're also choosing your Supreme Court justices, you're choosing your heads of departments on the federal level. You're choosing every single office that the president appoints. So yeah, come out to vote in November or mail in your ballot.